Okay, so I just looked up the Chomsky hierarchy, so I would be able to speak a little more coherently on this than I did in the last video. So type 0 is the Turing machine, and I always I think the reason that it confuses me is because the finite state automaton, or the regular languages, that is the lowest level. It is the simplest level. So that, to me, that should be where you start. That should be the type 0. So that's why I get confused with it. But anyway, the type 0 is the Turing machine is the mechanism, and the type of language is recursively enumerable. That's the name for it. This is the Chomsky hierarchy that I'm going over, and this has been, it's kind of the basis of a lot of things. It's definitely a valuable sort of thing, but it's been definitely like built upon, quite massively. If you're doing like computer science, it's pretty archaic at this point. It's not wrong, but it's not precise. Like I mentioned in the last video, my three mechanisms, they're only two of them are type 3, right? The finite state automaton, and the other one is type 1, the linear bounded automaton. There is no type 2 in my system. And the type 3, there's a vast amount of variety, right? So clearly, this type 0, type 1, type 2, type 3, the Chomsky hierarchy, it is missing a lot of detail. Also, my system is missing a lot of detail because I completely skip over type 2. I don't have a type 0 because it's not physically realizable. You can't have an actual Turing machine. It's not possible to do that. So, yeah. Why bother? Because I'm looking at computational psychological mechanisms that could possibly exist in the real world. Turing machines can't. So, fuck it. Although, yeah. So there's differences between the sorts of languages that can show up for a Turing machine and for a linear bounded automaton, but mostly the details in that difference, I'm not interested in. Which it probably seems like I'm just kind of being really hand wavy and like, yeah, fuck it. But we can measure the limits of the linear bounded mechanism, Emily, in a human mind pretty well. You can kind of nail it down and say, yeah, this is what we can do. And it turns out that when you account for that, it gives you all of the things that Chomskyans are like, oh, this is evidence for UG. It gives you absolutely all of them when you account for the... Fuck. It's not evidence of UG. It's evidence that the gist of the Chomsky hierarchy is legit. It's... yeah, so I completely... I do add one. It is not type 0. It is a completely different one that Chomsky did not talk about as far as I am aware. But Alan Turing did. And Chomsky, I'm sure at some point, Chomsky said all kinds of shit. So I'm sure at some point he has addressed this. I'm just not familiar with it. So, I'm going to naively claim that he didn't, because I'm not aware of it. But he probably fucking did. He's a legitimately smart dude. He knows lots of stuff. He's aware of stuff that's going on. He probably addressed the thing I'm going to say in a minute, but I'm not aware of him addressing it, and that doesn't mean anything that I'm not aware of it. It's just, it was never worth my time to go find out for sure, 100%, if he said anything about this or not. So, yeah. So he's got the type 0, type 1, type 2, type 3. My Genevieve, Eleanor, Emily is only the first two. Genevieve and Eleanor are type 3, and Emily is type 1. So I'm completely missing the type 0 because it's not physically realizable, not interested. Uh, like, yeah, that's a category, and that's actually Alan Turing's category. That's why they're called Turing machines, named after him. Type 2, the way that, and I'm sure there's something about this where I'm wrong, but the way that I understand this, I can't justify it on evolutionary terms in, progression of the development of brains. I can't justify a type 2. But as far as like what this is like the 50s or something, 57, something like that. When Chomsky's proposing this, it does make sense to mention type 2. So this is going to be stacks. If you're at all familiar with computer programming, particularly like kind of low level or like 1980s basic language programming, a stack it's a first in, first in, last out, last in, first out, right? So it's kind of like you think of it like putting plates on a cupboard, right? The first plate that you put down is going to be the last one that you ever pull back out because it's buried under all of the other plates. And the last plate that you put in is going to be the first one you can pull out. Unless you're doing some weird stupid shit where you're like trying to pull the bottom one out and you just drop plates all over the place and you just buy new dinnerware all the fucking time. You can do that. But I mean, clearly that's breaking the system. All right. The way that this works, it's called a stack because it's like when you stack things, the thing on the top of the stack is the easiest to get to, but the thing on the bottoms of the stack is probably what you set down first. So there's some limitations that come along with using this as your memory system, whereas like finite state automata, they're going to handle more of a queue sort of situation. Except they're not going to really have any memory, more or less, at all. But, first in, first out, right? You get a stimulus, you handle it. You get another stimulus, you handle it. You get another stimulus, you handle it. Right? That's more of a queue sort of system, right? So it's like a line of people going through a grocery store, right? The first person who comes up is the first person served. And the last person who comes up is the last person served. Generally, again, you can break that system, whatever. It's not a perfect analog, but that's the idea. So I leave out the pushdown automaton because I can't justify how the hell it would ever evolve. Because it is actually more complicated to implement than a linear bounded automaton, a type 1. You have to develop more things. The computational mechanism is actually more complicated. The language is weaker, and that's why Chomsky's rating it lower. But as far as I can tell, and again, I could be wrong about this, but as far as I can tell, actually implementing the mechanism requires more things to happen than implementing a basic linear bounded automata. Basically, you make a linear bounded automata and then you weaken it. Why? Why would you do that? And that weakening mechanism is an added mechanism. I can't see any justification for this to ever evolve. And, well, it could just randomly, random mutation, but it's not going to give you any advantages. So why would it be propagated? I don't see that happening. But the way that Chomsky was looking at it, coming from computer science. He was kind of just pulling in these computer science ideas. In computer science, you use stacks all the time. They're extraordinarily useful. They are a weaker mechanism, but it does allow you to do certain things in a very, very controlled sort of way. And they have a lot of value for handling a computer. But as in evolutionary terms, I just wasn't able to see a justification for it, so I left it out. And this could totally be one of the places where I'm just completely wrong. But as far as I know, I'm kind of the first person looking at it in this very specific way. So I expect to be wrong about things. I don't expect to be right about absolutely everything that I'm saying. So this is absolutely a place where, yeah, I might be wrong about this one. I'm telling you, if you're actually looking at my ideas and trying to develop them and, turn them into something a little more real, a little, improve this, this is a thing to look at, because, I'm not even going to go over the details of why I think this is wrong, because I kind of want somebody else to look at this and either on their own come to the same conclusion that I did, or on their own come to a completely different conclusion. I'm curious to see what happens with that. But I do have, apart from Genevieve and Eleanor, which are type 3, and Emily, which is type 1, there is a fourth one. And this one I introduced a little bit later. And so she's also a female character, and I named her after a mythological figure, Lilith. So Lilith is the evil sister, right? So you've got the three sisters of the computational mechanisms, the evolutionary computational mechanisms, and then Lilith, the fourth sister, the evil sister. What Lilith is, as far as I know, Chomsky didn't really deal with very much. It's not part of the Chomsky hierarchy. So the mechanisms in the Chomsky hierarchy handle computable functions. So that is, they're able to, it goes from the simplest to the most capable of handling problems that you can actually solve. There is, however, another more powerful sort of computation, but it completely breaks all of the rules. And so this was brought up by Alan Turing, I believe. I'm pretty sure I don't know that the name that I'm going to use is the name he came up with, but he did talk about it. So the term I'm going to use for it is oracle machine. So the basic idea here is, you can ask a Turing machine a question, and it will process and figure out and come to, based on following a set of rules, it will come to a conclusion. It will decide yes or no to your question. The oracle machine just knows what the answer is. It doesn't have to do anything. It just magically knows. So this isn't actually a mechanism. This isn't a computer. This isn't, right? It's not solving anything. It just knows. It just magically knows. It's God, basically. The problem that I have with Chomsky not addressing this, at least not prominently addressing this, because I'm going to mention it again. I am not familiar with 100% of Noam Chomsky's work. I don't care that much, but it's certainly not something that he has made. If he has dealt with it, it is not very, very mainstream what he talks about. The reason that I take an issue with that is because his universal grammar is this category of mechanism. UG is Lilith, or an instantiation of Lilith. And you can demonstrate this pretty simply. So, what Lilith is capable of doing, is instead of you give a stimulus and the mechanism reacts in some way, in some predictable, rule-driven way, and produces an output. Instead of that, what Lilith can do is you ask it a question and it doesn't process it at all. Nothing in the physical universe happens. It just gives you an answer magically. It's a spirit. It's God. It's something supernatural. That's what's happening with Lilith. That's also what's happening with UG if you carefully analyze what the claims of UG are. So, I might be a little, I might fumble through this because I haven't looked at this in a while. But, basically, well, there's a few ways we can look at this. I might only be able to remember one of them right now. But, the basic claim of UG is that language is an instinct. Okay. That's almost not even a claim, but okay. So language is an instinct. There's a genetic endowment. This is a term, I don't know if this is Chomsky's term, but it's a term I've definitely heard from Chomskyians. So it's in that realm, it's in that, that field. People working in that field use this term, genetic endowment. So the idea here is that there's encoded into the human genome, there are some degree of rules. There's something that's giving us language. Okay. It's assumed, I would imagine, at least to just about everybody that I've pressed the issue with, that language itself is sort of an emergent behavior. So, yeah, there's this genetic endowment, but it's not like hardcore. Whatever. It gets really wishy-washy really fast because it doesn't make sense. But, so, yeah, we have this instinct for language. And there are rules. There seems to be a lot of rules. So then you get to the question of, well, where the fuck did these rules come from? Particularly because some of them actually appear to make us dumb. Dumber than we are. Demonstrably dumber than we actually are. If some of these rules are real, if they're real rules, they seem to make us dumb. So why? Why would they be there? What is causing these rules to happen? There's a few other problems too, because every human community on the planet has to have exactly the same UG in order for this to operate. Every human being alive has to have the same UG, the same genetic endowment, without mutation. Which is really, so this is fascinating. Where the fuck did it come from? And how is it not subject to mutation? It also, yeah, so one of the core arguments for UG is that there are aspects of language that are unlearnable. Just take a second. These computational mechanisms that we've been talking about, fundamentally what they are are learning mechanisms. Right? You take some input and you process it, and some of it goes into memory. That's learning. Some aspects of language, according to Chomskyans, are unlearnable. And this is evidence of UG. Well, if they're unlearnable, then they're not computable. And if they're not computable, then it lies outside of the domain of what all Turing machines are capable of. That makes UG, by definition, universal grammar, an oracle machine. Also, the fact that it's apparently supernatural in several other regards, like it didn't arise for a reason. Chomsky's actually on record saying this, that it just happened, just whatever. I don't know if he had an aneurysm or something when he said this, but he straight up just said, "Yeah, it's magic." Not in those words, but that's actually what his claim clearly necessarily boils down to. It's just magic. There's no reason for it. It just happened. Nothing motivated it. It just happened. That's strange. It's completely immune to mutation and influence from human evolution. Because every human community on the planet has to have it in exactly the same way. And by now we know that it has to be, I think the oldest date I ever saw Chomsky put on it, and this was maybe 07 or 09 or something, so like 10 years ago. At least. Was 50,000 years. But at that time I found that to be absurdly recent. And really what he was doing is he was just kind of like putting a minimum date on that, and I understand that, but that minimum date is still absurd. It needs to be older than that. By a lot. By a fuck ton more. Yeah, I would put a minimum date on that of about 2 million years, personally. I would also put a maximum date on that of about 2 million years. Pretty sure it happened about 2 million years ago. You can actually see it in the fossil record. Hyoid bones. That should be a video. Hyoid bones. God damn it. Yeah. So it appeared for no reason. It's not subject to evolution, and it specifically does something that no computational device could ever do. Even a physically unreliable ultimate Turing machine. Universal Turing machine. That one that requires infinite amounts of time and infinite amounts of memory in order to compute things. That one's not capable of handling what UG can do. It's supernatural. It's Lilith. It's magic. It's an oracle machine. And Chomsky has actually basically laid it out that, yeah, this doesn't make any goddamn sense. But he still maintains it, and his followers still maintain it. Why? What the fuck? What the fuck? Yeah, so like to a degree, to a very trivial, not even like, yeah, I got you, degree, I sort of agree with the crux of what UG is supposed to be talking about. Like, yeah, something happened in human ancestry that gave us a communication system that is more computationally powerful than any other animal on the planet. Yeah. That is the extent to which I agree. The details of UG, however, no. No. From a computer science standpoint, bullshit. Not possible. Yuji is not possible. You can't have it. It's not real. It can't be. It's God. And really fundamentally that makes Chomskyan a religion, a theistic religion. Officially, like, Yuji is a supernatural being that you are, in a sense, you're worshiping it. You're devoting a lot of time to it. You're dedicated to researching it. You're dedicated to it. You're devoted to it. This is a theistic religion in in a very literal sense. That's what this is. Anyway, I'm sure that'll offend a lot of people. Yeah. If anybody would ever watch any of my videos, which is fantastic, I have absolutely no viewers. That's whatever. I don't actually care. YouTube's not profitable with this. Why should I be? But here it is. Here it is. Yeah, so my 4 mechanisms, 2 of them are type 3, one of them is type 1, and the other one doesn't even have a type, according to the Chomsky hierarchy, because Chomsky didn't care about it, even though his entire concept about how language processing occurs is handled by that mechanism. So, woo! And this is probably, that problem is probably why Chomskyans are so obsessed with trying to understand what is the nature of the computational mechanism that handles language. Well, they can't ever come to that understanding because it's a beautiful, it's like a perfect storm. You're going to keep getting those paychecks because you're never going to answer that question. It's almost... See, and I wouldn't put it past Chomsky to be smart enough to understand this and have done this on purpose. I wouldn't assume that he's smart enough, that he did that on purpose, or that he necessarily understands it. But he's clearly not stupid. He's not a dumb guy. Also, he's Lakatosian? Yeah. However you say that dude's name, I think he's Hungarian. Lakatos? He's definitely a fan of that guy with the scientific program idea. This sets up a very stable one over a very long period of time. So it kind of guarantees work for a body of scientists for a very long period of time, which would be a genius move. I don't know if he made that move on purpose, but there's that.